Thanks for being here. I'll just give you a short introduction about who I am and what is the theme that I'm going to explore today. So, as Jan mentioned already, I'm an artist and a scholar. So that means that I write about bodies, machines, and sound, but I also work with them physically, and sometimes I abuse them, both human bodies, machines, and sound as well. So this talk is about ways to use technology in order to destroy the idea of normal bodies existing in this world. The concept of normality in itself is pretty arguable, but rather than doing an analysis of what normal means, I will just focus on what are the other quite normal ways that we don't see in which our bodies change, our bodies take different shapes. And all of this happens through technology and sound, as I will show soon. So, just to tackle a little the idea of normality, we're going to go back to the 13th and 14th century. And this image that you see here is a series of exotic people described by European people living in Europe. They would go exploring in different places. They were colonized immediately afterwards, but back at that time, colonization was still a bit far away, and explorers would either travel to this place or actually pretend they traveled to those spaces and places, and then come back and write books about it and describe the people living there. And you will see they kind of not make much sense anymore today to our eyes. But this is not a sci-fi book. It's actually a scientific description of what people from abroad in different places other than Europe look like for the time. And what we see there is something very simple, something very common. We still live it today. Everything that is different from us is not normal. Once it's something it's not normal, it's quite easy to call it a monster. That's how the whole logic of normality and abnormality works in our society. And another example, for instance, is this book, which appeared to be written by Aristotle, but that's a fake. It's not written by Aristotle. But it is indeed a very successful book in the sense that it has been around for over 200 years. And again, a scientific publication by someone signing Aristotle himself, and explaining the secrets of generations. So a lot of different arguments, from description of genitalia and how they work, to very interesting stories, but still quite creepy stories about how women conceive and how women give birth. And one of the major fantasies coming out from this book that actually remained for hundreds of years as a fact was that the book says that when a woman was pregnant and she was exposed to some traumatic experience, or maybe she had nightmares or something like that, then her baby would be small, black and hairy, or in any case monstrous and terrible. And of course this was a very simple and terrible way of punishing women for giving birth to babies that were not normal. So that's about the discussion of normality. So again, we all live this every day. Each of us probably had some different experience in this regard. But as I said, I want to go a little deeper, and I want to contextualize the issue of normality within the use of technology that we do today, and in particular of body technologies. So for body technologies, I mean sensors that we have in a smartwatch or whatever, but I mean also computers. They are probably the most intimate piece of technology that we spend our time with. And I'm also talking about prostheses, and I'm also talking about artificial intelligence used within our computers, used within our environment, and so on. All of these are somehow body technologies because they affect our body in a way or another. So the first problem with this is that most of the time when we think about one of these body technology, say a prosthesis, a robotic prosthesis, we are used to think about it as an extension, so something that extends out of our body. Now the word extension, it's pretty peculiar because the etymology comes from ex, which is a Latin word to mean the movement from inside to outside. So it's something that comes from inside and then separates itself. And so it creates this tension coming out from you and leaving your body and going outside. So that's what we mean by extension, especially in relation to technology. Again, a prosthetic robot is an extension of my body. But so I argue that that's not pretty much the case, because there is much more into a prosthesis or in a smartwatch or something like that, other than something extending my physical body. And what is that thing? So apart from being a physical extension of my body, what is a prosthesis? A way of understanding this is by talking a bit about this word called incorporation, which I did not invent myself. It's a pretty used notion in feminist studies and disability studies, but also study of body and technology. So to incorporate, as you can already guess, is quite the opposite of extending. So incorporating means to take something in, and even if it's something very different from you, you make it part of your body. So you incorporate something. And incorporation is a pretty important idea in relation to body technologies, because the whole point of this talk, which I'll make now and probably will make sense more later, is that we don't work with the technologies outside of our bodies. We don't extend ourselves with technology outside of our bodies. We incorporate them. So they are part of us and we are part of them. We'll get there. A first very practical, maybe trivial example. This is Beatrice Vio. She's a very young girl who recently won the Olympics for musketeering, obviously the Paralympics, because she has no legs and she does not have forearm either. So what happened to her is a disease that caused the amputation of all the four limbs when she was very young. And she studies musketeering anyway with prosthesis. And I think a couple of years ago, if I'm not wrong, she won the gold medal. And she made quite the headlines, because not only because she won, but also because she's a very young girl with an interesting way of approaching her disability, which I prefer to call different ability. And so she makes plenty of these pictures which are incredible, are lovely. You should check it out. And there is nothing to say about that. It's all in the picture, no? So here you already see, like, the prostheses are incorporated with her so much that even when she takes them out, they still seem part of her body, right? So here we come to one of the core concepts, so hybridity. And hybrid is something that emerged from the union of two different things. And what's important in the hybrid is the things that get united are different. Because that's the way in which each of the parts being united can acquire some new characteristic, something unexpected. So, a less trivial example of this kind of hybridity is these people from Cambodia. Cambodia is a very particular country because it's so full of landmines that we Western civilization have left there in their countries after the war, that they have a serious problem in providing enough prostheses for the population. It's mental. So what they do is they recycle them. Because the thing is, if you grow up as a baby with your prostheses, of course, you cannot keep the same prostheses forever because your body changed. So they recycle prostheses. And again, this image is pretty telling again. So, you know, you have the hybridity of somebody having a very public and successful life, but you also have hybridity as this one, which becomes a really important everyday matter. I want you to keep in mind all of this. And then, of course, talking about hybridity, what about the cyborg, right? So we talk about technology, hybrid, prostheses. Where is the cyborg in all of this? I'm not going to talk much about the cyborg here because the very idea of the cyborg is pretty much flawed these days. Briefly, about the origin of the idea of the cyborg, this was the invention of a couple of scientists working in aerospace science and research. And so basically they invented back in the 60s some ways which did not actually work, but they wrote a paper about it, in which a rat was embedded with a pump that would inject automatically in the rat some substances to provide for his subsistence. And in their minds, this was some kind of cybernetic organism that would be automatically able to survive even if its own body was not working anymore because he had this attached prosthesis that would enable it. And that's where the first appearance of the term cyborg happened. And from there was a very good and fertile time of research around the cyborg, again, especially in feminist studies and body studies. And from there, many of these ideas about how to counteract the monsters and the normality emerged. But then what happened, then the media came in, and the movie industry, and everything, and then we ended up with Terminator, we ended up with the whole range of cyborg that we have today, and either they kill everybody, or they are over-sexualized women that possibly want to kill everybody. So that's the idea of cyborg we have now, and that's why I'm not so interested in it, because it's flawed. It became a bit obsolete. But there is something in there. There is still something about being one with a machine while conserving, maintaining your own characteristic. So that something, it's this idea that humans and machines, technological machines, or actors, as I call there, they form an ecology. Ecology, in this sense, it's not necessarily an environmental ecology, but a network of many, many, many different things and elements, all connected to each other. So what I mean with this? Basically that my body and the technology we use, as I said earlier, are part of the same network. And we influence the machine and their development, and vice versa, the machine influences us and our development. So that's what I mean by ecology, in a very broad term. And there is something more there, so I'll make another example. So I'm a bit deaf, and I have hearing aid on both ears. Now what's interesting about the hearing aid is that they have some little machine learning inside, so that they can recognize different ambience noise, and possibly warn me or change the way the frequencies are amplified in my ears. And that's quite interesting because, of course, the hearing aid allowed me to hear better, which means also that my psyche feels better, because if I cannot talk to you in a crowded bar, I feel bad, right? I cannot follow your conversation. It's a terrible feeling. And so we have this psychic level of interaction, but then we also have a physical level of affection. Because, for instance, when I'm without the hearing aid, I perceive echoes, like these big echoes here, in a very different way. And we orientate in space following echoes. So, for instance, when I was in Goldsmith during my PhD, we had a mensa, like a public place where you go eat, and we went always there. At the time, I did not have hearing aids, so I was getting used to the environment. I could move in the space. The ceiling was really low, but I, could orientate myself. And then as soon as I started wearing the hearing aid, I could not feel the same reverberation as before, and I started hitting the ceiling and hitting stuff around me. So that's a trivial example to explain how a piece of technology can also affect physically. So we have psychological affection, physical affection, and we have also physiological affection, of course. The hearing aid changed the way my brain understands sound. Without the hearing aid, my brain cannot compute the sound anymore. It has to learn again to hear what it can. And in this sense, the hearing aid changed my physiology. So that's a little intimate example of what I mean by human-machine ecologies. And this brings us to something that's quite interesting as well, something called Corporeal Knowing, which is an idea by Julian Enriquez. Corporeal Knowing is something that you learn with your body, but through an instrument. So any musician in the room knows what corporeal knowing is. You start playing your instrument, you're not very familiar with it, then the more you play, the more you get to know how the instrument works and what kind of sounds you can take out of it. But also, if you work with iron, that's the same. You have just different instruments, but the more you work with them, the more you work through these instruments, you get attuned with it. You learn about the instrument and you learn about yourself, how you use the instrument. So that's an idea of corporeal knowing. And some very interesting examples are included in this book, Thinking in Jazz, which is kind of a brick. It's like this big, like 600 pages of interviews with all most famous jazz players, improvisers, and also students. Now, what's interesting in this book, apart from the very fascinating interviews with everybody, well, there is something that all of these improvisers have in common. And this is the fact that they all say the instrument, their instrument, being a trumpet, a double bass, whatever, gives them the notes. So it's a very different way of thinking about the instrument, a musical instrument in this case. It's not that you are in full control of your musical instrument, No very good musician is in full control of his own instrument. It's quite the opposite. It's about interacting with an instrument in a particular way to exploit the particular characteristic of those instruments so that the instrument will offer you the music you want to play. And this is particularly more interesting when in the book somebody mentioned that just before a concert, during the trip in the car, one of the players broke a finger in the door of the car. I was like, man, like how am I gonna play now? Like, got my finger broken. Okay, well, you know, I'm an improviser, so I'm gonna try and improvise something. And what happened there is that he obviously managed to play. Of course, you can play, but what happened is that the same exact pieces of music that he would improvise over and over and over during tours and so on, in that concert came out totally new. It was completely renovating the way he was playing the musical phrase on the double bass, but without having rehearsed anything like that before. So the explanation that comes through many, many pages of discussion of this thing is that basically when there is a limit situation, something that really forces your body because it's not able to move and behave as it was normally, so broken fingers. When that happens, the body actually can interact with the instrument in a new way, in a way that is not the normal way. And it's something that comes out of practice. So if you play, you will just keep playing in a way or another. And the fingers, because they're used to some playing certain phrase or not, they are also used to change those phrases by themselves. If you are a musician, I think you can understand this. If you are not, then it becomes a little tricky, so we'll give you another example. But before that, I wanted to focus on this limit situation, this threshold condition. So, you know, our bodies, they all operate within normal condition, right? Now I hope everything is feeling fine, everyone is feeling good, our bodies are in normal condition. But then, you know, you break a finger, or you're under stress, or you're not good, something in your body, and then you reach a threshold condition. You reach a limit over which the body is not used to operate. So I'm not talking about death, right? I'm just talking about something that still allows you to live properly and move, but which is out of your comfort zone, out of the normal way your body operates. So in this sense, the threshold is a particular intensity that needs to be exceeded for a certain reaction to occur. And if that reaction occurs, you will probably find yourself doing something new that you haven't been doing before. Another example, automatic writing. So this is the thing that sometimes you see when you, I don't know what's the English name for that, when you sit down around the table in a very dark room with some kind of spiritual guru and they recall ghosts from your past or something. And then sometimes they have this board with a lot of letters on it, and you have an instrument that you use with your hand. It is like a little piece of wood shaped like that with a ball beneath. And supposedly, the person who is guiding you into this experience is being guided over a range of letters, creating words which are the words that the ghosts would like to tell you. Now, apart from all the speculation about ghosts and so on, we're not getting into that, although it would be funny, but what's interesting there is that this is not an exercise that has to do only with mystics and stuff. It's actually a very well-known writing technique for writers, and it's called automatic writing. So basically what you do is you take this board with all the letters, you take this piece of wood with a ball, and you put your hands on the board, and then you just do something else. Listen to music, or read a novel, or anything that lets you concentrate very strongly onto something. And after some training, you will get your hand moving over this board. It's really fascinating. There are lots of articles about that. But in particular, it was really interesting experience described by these two researchers, Solomon and Stein, back in the 18th century, 19th century? 19th century. And Gertrude Stein, one of these researchers, is actually a pretty well-known writer. She wrote an amazing book. And a lot of these were written using this technique. And so, why this technique is possible? You need basically a very intense training. So just keep repeating this exercise over and over. And then heightened attention. Try to focus very strongly onto something else, not what you're trying to do. And then you will reach at some point a feeling of becoming unconscious. So you think, okay, this does not make sense anymore. How can I know that I'm unconscious? In fact, you do not know. That's the whole point. So what I'm talking about is there are mechanisms in which, through very focused attention, very intense training, then you can let yourself become unconscious. It's a form of entrainment. It's kind of a trance state, a bit like meditation if you want, but it's not meditation. And what is really interesting in this is that it shows pretty clearly what we discussed briefly earlier. So there is some kind of psychic link, some psychic attunement between the human body and the instrument we use. Because it is through them that we can get into this trance state, or we can get affected at a physiological, psychological, and physical level. So, then what about the question of, do we have to divide the body from the extension, the real from the prosthetic, the cognitive from the corporeal? I don't think that makes sense, really. I think it's much more interesting to think about this idea of incorporating technology and how that leads to hybrid forms of bodies. What's really interesting in all of these is that these hybrid bodies, they're not just existing in books or very far from us now. We can all live them. We can all inhabit with our own body this kind of hybrid. How? That's a very good question. So there are many ways. I don't have the truth in my pocket, but I have methodologies that I have developed in my artistic practice. And I work specifically with sound and machine to see how I can get into this trance state, how I can experience this feeling of becoming unconscious, and how the machines can let me do that and influence that as I do it. So, another trivial example, rave. These are all hybrid bodies. Or if you want even better, this is a whole one hybrid body. And here it's actually happening, everything I just described until now. There are machines technology, wall of sound speakers, and there are lots of bodies. There are lots of vibrations, musical vibrations. And these bodies are changing their experience there. Possibly also thanks to some drug, but they could also take the drugs at home, but the experience would not be the same. It's about being all together with a specific kind of technology there. And why this is important? Because by creating this kind of hybrids, we create also new cultural and political tools. We can use ourselves, our own hybrid bodies, to inform the way we see the world at a cultural and political level. Less trivial example of how sound and machine can create different kind of bodies. So this is a picture of a jet which is used to create sonic booms, which are huge and very low frequency vibration, very similar to earthquakes. So why people would want to create these sonic booms? Well, they use it in territories where there is war, and they use it to scare people, but not once, every day, and not once a day, multiple times a day, every day, for months. What you see there on the side is actually the sonic vibration that the jet is producing. So imagine just that. Of course, this is an old picture. Nowadays, they use drones to do that. So imagine what kind of hybrids you have. So, these kind of hybrids do not have only fantastic and positive characteristics, but can be also pretty negative and abused of. So here we come to the point that is quite important to me. Body, sound, and technology all together, they make politics. Not the politics of politicians, but the politics of our life, of our social life with each other. And what I want to stress here is that everything I'm saying is not something just abstract and staying in the essays that I write. I think it's important to experience this hybridity in any way we can. And the thing that I can do, it's doing performances, and that's what I try to do. So Corpus Nil, it's a performance where I quite directly explore this way of being in the world. So in Corpus Nil, I perform with my own body and a software which is driven by some artificial intelligence algorithms. So I move on stage. That's what you see from the theater seat. And I have a particular choreography which is semi-improvised. And the AI software also has a choreography of sound and light which improvises throughout the performance. But we are not separated. We are actually connected through cables, because I wear some sensors of my body that pick up sounds from my muscle moving, and they also pick up electrical discharges of my muscles, and then feed these to the AI software. But the point is not that the data from my body control the software. Rather, the software takes this data in, analyzes them, and then see what to use and what not. So what I can do is, during the choreography, improvise movements and continuously listening to the sound pattern and the light pattern that the AI software produces, and try to play with it, try to feel it as I am playing it, as I am part of it, and it's part of me. So to do so, you need intense training, very heightened attention, and the feeling of becoming unconscious. There is a way in which I emphasize this aim to become unconscious. So for instance, I don't know if you understood it yet, but my head is here, so I'm like that. So my head is on the floor for the duration of the whole performance, which is 20 minutes, so I got a blood rush to my head, and that actually helps getting into a trance state. And with my head on the stage floor, I can also feel the vibration of the sound being produced by the software. So not only I listen through my ear, but I vibrate totally. And the last thing is the choreography. So the choreography is made on purpose to be very challenging, so that I cannot even think about, oh, maybe the software could do this now, or oh, maybe I don't like that. I don't have time to that. I'm like that, and I need to enter into these weird positions that are quite demanding to hold on. It's all about tension and twisting limbs and stuff like that. And all of this, it's on purpose. So in a way, I abuse my body to actually make it easier for it to become unconscious. And you know, it's not that I'm a master of unconsciousness. Sometimes I just can't get it. It depends on the performance. Some other times it starts just like that. I start and I'm here, and everything goes fine, and I feel this entrainment. Some other it does not happen. And that's exactly what I mean by restlessness of hybridity, which is the title of this talk. So hybrids are interesting and fascinating and alive, because they are restless. They are unstable. They work, they do not work. They have to change the way they work. Then something happens, again instability, and then reconstruction again. That's what a hybrid is. So it's not normal, it's not fixed. And that's what makes it fascinating and worthy of exploring. So, going a little more deep into my recent practice, then from Corpus Nihil, which I made in 2016, then we went through a couple of years of studying neurorobotics with a particular aim to explore how repetition, shock, and pain constitute fundamental elements in the way we create normal bodies. So, what exactly I mean by that? Well, there are, for instance, many religious rituals where people punish themselves, well, in the Western religions, so in Christianity, in Judaism, and Muslim religion. There are several examples. There are people with chains hitting them in large parade going across the cities. Or in Italy, we got still rituals today where you hold a sponge full of glass beads, like small pieces of glass, and then you drank a lot of wine, and then when the time comes, you take this thing and you start hitting very hard on your legs. And you do that in order to let blood flow out of your body. And you do that repetitively, obsessively, for your God. In that way, you render your body something conformable to whatever religion you are following or whatever society you live in. So that's an example. So drawing from these ideas, I started developing amygdala. Amygdala is a robotic prosthesis which is driven by artificial intelligence algorithm. I couldn't do that myself alone. I have a huge crew of scientists, designers, and artists working with me. And so basically amygdala is something like this. It changes continuously, but it kind of resembles a body. And it has these artificial intelligence neural networks, which means that we do not program the way the robot moves, but we just program the way the robot perceives itself. So the movement emerges autonomously from the perception of the robot of its own body. And the only thing that these artificial intelligence robots do is tries to learn a ritual similar to the ones that I described here. But this is an animistic ritual. It's not a religious one. And it's a ritual practiced in several tribes across Africa, Papua New Guinea, some part of East Asia, where somebody from your family cuts many little cuts on your body. There is a similar aim to let the blood flow out so that you can purify yourself from whatever bad thing you still have in your body. For some is the femininity of the mothers, from others is some ancient demons that needs to go out. But there is something else that makes it different from the religious rituals, and that these scars are made on purpose to make their body resemble their own gods. So for instance, in Papua New Guinea, they worship crocodiles, and they do this pattern cutting in order for their skin to look like the skin of a crocodile. And it kind of does. So amygdala, it's try to learning that ritual forever. The only problem is that I never give it a criteria for success or failure. It just keeps doing it forever. So in the beginning, you can recognize a little pattern in there. I mean, it's making patterns, but it's just making it forever. And the whole point is not the robot making nice pattern. You could do that with very little technology. You don't need the AI to do that. But the point is about having a robot that it's learning continuously how to move, how to interact, and how to perform this ritual by itself. And what that means from the perspective of us humans. If you have an autonomous prosthesis, like a paradox, that is a form of hybrid bodies as well. And that's the ritual that amygdala tries to learn. Is from this Kanigara tribe in Papua New Guinea. And again, this is also a hybrid bodies, at least in my mind. They have instruments which are leaves, which are knives. They have bodies, and together, through training, attention, intensity, unconsciousness, they alter their own bodies into new hybrids. So, to conclude, of course, the machine is performing a ritual as a hybrid body. It has these actions that are repetitive, and it can learn. But can the machine purify itself by doing a ritual? I don't think so. It doesn't have anything to purify itself from. The real point is that the machine can learn, but they do not know they're learning. That's a very important point about artificial intelligence, which is too often left overlooked. If you are able to learn, it doesn't mean that you know you're learning. And above all, machines do not experience. They can perceive their body, they can perceive what's around them, but they don't have a psychological experience, right? So am I destroying my whole argument until now? No, absolutely not. That's exactly part of the point. Machines are totally different from what we are. Artificial intelligence, especially the artificial intelligence used now, is something totally far from how the human body works. It doesn't have anything to do with it. We don't learn by looking millions times how a butterfly is, and then after million butterfly, we know that a butterfly. No, we don't work like that. But what's interesting is exactly that we produce this technology, and this technology produce ourselves in exchange. So the words I want to leave you with is that apart from the importance of a hybrid, I think something close that most people can also do is learn to be affected by machines, by other things around you, by other people. And this means also to recognize that we are all vulnerable, right? We are not just alone in our own castle and nobody can touch us. That's just a fantasy. So it's about forgetting control. Control is another fantasy. We cannot control anything. We can try, but it's pointless because things happen. The planet changes. Animal dies, family dies. We cannot control things. Computer breaks. Bugs are everywhere. So it's about more concentrating on attunement, how we can link with people, with machines, how we can recognize our own vulnerability and the importance of it. And the whole point is perhaps then we can manage to live as hybrid ourselves, as hybrids that are fascinating, that are enchanting, and of course restless, never get tired. Thank you. I think perhaps, yeah, we have time for questions.
I was wondering two things. The first one is, first question is a bit just so I understand. With Corpus Nil, I was just wondering if the software, is it an artificial intelligent software? Is it a neural network that is controlling the music and the lighting?
It's so basically it's a net of a few. They're called oscillatory network. So the network itself is made of two neurons that create oscillation with each other. And then you can link those with others and others and others, and then you create this whole network of oscillation things.
So I was just wondering if, if you have a process of learning, do you restart it every performance, or do you keep it evolving throughout the duration of the lifespan of this project? And I'll ask another question. And the second question is different. I mean, hearing you talking about your idea of hybridity and bodies, and kind of wondering, one of the first things that came to my mind is kind of a comparison between your discourse of what you're saying to what Stellark is doing with his famous quote that the body is obsolete. I was just wondering, what are your thoughts about that?
You say Stellark? Yeah. Okay, so first question. So in Corpus Nil, the learning process is limited to one performance. So it just stops after one performance and then learn again. That was made in that way at the time because of my skills were not enough. And then as a principle, I do not change my pieces after I developed them. But then now for amygdala, for instance, I'm exploiting this further and looking into ways in which the robot can learn through each iteration, so that you can install it, perform the ritual for hours, for months, whatnot. But then when you switch it off, it actually goes in standby and keeps crunching whatever it has done throughout the whole day, which is basically data about the way it moved, when it got stuck, how it got out of the stuckness, and where it was cutting better and whatnot. So there are ways in which you can create this memory, like long-term memory, and then basically having the robot teaching itself what to do next from previous experience. Yeah. And then Stellark, yeah, well, of course he's always been a great inspiration. I know his work pretty well. We are friends as well. I wrote about it several times. I think his approach is quite different because, of course the output may seem similar, but he has this famous idea of the body being obsolete, right? Which oftentimes is understood as, the body is like something we want to forget about and so on. But that's not what he means, really. What he means is that the body itself is something that can be sculpted in different ways. He was a sculptor, in fact, before getting into performance art. So he has this idea of malleability of the body, which you can see pretty clear in this last work that he did with growing the ear on his arm. It's really about the malleability of the body and then breaking through the limits of technology as well. And so that was a big inspiration for me always. And what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get that heritage and bring it into some new directions, also using sound, which it's always something peripheral for Stellark, but also bringing in explicitly a lot of feminist studies, disability studies, bring them explicitly there. So as you can see in Corpus Nil, I play a lot with the idea of object, something that fascinates you, but also you want to refuse. The same goes in amygdala. So yeah, briefly I would say those are the main difference, although they are connected, of course. Yeah. Other questions?
Just when you answered my question, you said something that I was just wondering why don't you further develop your work after you showed it once? Like, for me, my work is always like a living organism. It never stops, and we keep on developing it until we don't show it anymore. And your approach is exactly the opposite. I'm just wondering why.
Yeah, so of course we all artists have these ongoing processes, right? And an idea never stops and never dies anywhere. But personally, I like to think that a piece of work that I did at some point in time, if I actually realized it and performed it, it means that the piece has said everything that it has to at that time. So, in a way, I see the piece an integrity on its own, like to have its own integrity, and I don't want to mess with that anymore. Even if there are things that I don't like, and the further ideas that I've developed, of course I do not kill them, but I try to nurture them in a different environment of a newer work. And I think in this way, at least it works for me, I can build continuity while still producing regularly new works. That works quite well. And I think also in a way it gives you a little more freedom, like, you think like that work is like very bad, like I did it so many years ago, but then, it's like, just keep it there. You did it because you wanted to, so there was some reason there, and just move on to something else. Yeah. All right. So thank you again.